Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Rebecca Hunter, President and CEO of Baseload Energy, and soon to be Geiger Energy, which will be trading under the ticker BEEP in a few weeks. So the merger is complete and we're going forward. And so I wanted to make one of these videos for shareholders and for anyone who's interested in the project. This video will be one of many to showcase the exploration and or to give more context that interviews can miss or just not delve into enough. And so this is a way to kind of go into a bit more detail and kind of steer the conversation the way that's more helpful, I think, in a lot of ways to shareholders. So I'd like to call kind of this series and kind of what I'd like to do for the next while the Pathway to Discovery series. And I also wanted to give a quick update on our exploration. So this summer's exploration has come to a close at the Aberdeen project. And so we're just wrapping up and closing up camp. So we essentially had about 2 months, not even, of drilling. It was a very quick summer. We had a late start because of the timeline of the merger. And we were also kicked out because of weather fairly early. So this year up in the Arctic was quite an odd one. You get it every few years, every 10 years, but there was no summer. It was quite cold and it was very late spring, and which allowed us to do this exploration, by the way, because we had a lot of stuff to haul over land, and we didn't get started very early. Typically, we like to start that in March, even February. You know, the earlier the better, more and more so it seems every year. But we didn't. So we actually were still hauling in May, and there was still great snow cover, and it was still as cold. And so that was actually worked out to our benefit big time to be able to do this program as well. But what it did also do is made the exploration a bit challenging this summer. So there was a lot of fog, it wasn't very warm, a lot of rain, a lot of overcast. So it's just one of those years. But we did get to explore, and that was one thing that was not going to happen, or it was going to come in a very limited version if this merger hadn't come about. So in the end, we completed 20 holes at 5 targets and just over 5,000 meters. So I'll be talking about this in subsequent videos and interviews and delving into those target areas. Our samples are being shipped now, and so it'll take, well, we'll see how long it takes, of course. But we'll still be discussing the results, and we'll follow that up with the geochemistry as we go along. But today, what I wanted to do was talk about Loki. So the last press release, we talked about the new mineralization that we found, and I feel that it really warrants a bit more explanation, you know, why we think these results are very exciting, and hopefully this video will provide some better context on why we think so, and hope that you will think so as well. So this is the project area. So again, we did 20 holes. We have a number of targets. And so this summer we got to 5 areas. We focused a lot at Loki, and hence the reason why I'm going to talk about that in the video. We got a few holes into Bjorn, certainly not enough, but we will talk about that in subsequent videos. And then we got some basement targets in too. So we got down to Tarzan, incredibly strong gravity anomaly that had a few historical holes in the past that had really good alteration. So we got there, Lobster, and then one little hole at Tadagak, but it was out of the main anomaly. It was testing another geochemical and geophysical feature that was interesting that I just wanted to test along the faults. And so again, you know, the big overall context of our exploration is targeting for scale and upside. We do have 2 small prospects, 2 deposits that we can continue to build, but we'll need time to do that and a lot more focused capital in order to target it optimally so that we can delineate it properly. But also just to make this project more feasible, to get the interest that we need to really showcase that this is a basin that we need to be in. We need to find more. And this type of project, we have multiple trends. It's so fertile, it's so rich with already mineralization, but it's rich with alteration, basically pointing to a lot of upside. And so that's what we want to chase and showcase, because that's what'll be the game changer in order to get the excitement that's needed to really explore this area of the world. And so the targets that we have, of course, we use a lot of gravity. So this image here is a gravity image. So blue gravity lows, red gravity highs. We use that because of alteration. So gravity is a good way to model alteration in the rocks, in covered rocks at depth. And so clay altered rocks are less dense, not altered rock, so just pure granite that you'd have in your countertop or you'd see on a building, that would be very high density, therefore be a red spot, a gravity high. And so this sort of imaging technique can show you where rocks are basically altered. They've been broken up by faults, or they've been impregnated by fluids and have formed a lot of clay. So, and these deposits, which I'll talk about a bit more, have that clay, and that's why we do that. We also look for fault zones, because that's the plumbing system. You can't have deposits, you can't move fluids and make deposits without fault zones. And then lastly, you need a trap. So you need some sort of circumstance where the fluids and the uranium that's in that fluid basically comes out of solution or gets trapped. And so that can be a number of mechanical and chemical sort of processes that lead that to happen, which it can include fracturing, you get mixing, and confining lithologies. So what I mean by that is sometimes rock units that are very competent or don't have a lot of holes in them, ability for fluid to move into them, fluid will run along them. And that's a way of focusing fluid, and then that can help in the trapping mechanism and has led to some very large deposits because of those features. So another aspect to kind of highlight here too is there's the sandstone. So we're looking kind of for two main deposit end members of the unconformity type. So about a third of our property is covered in sandstone. And so these areas, and then there's some outliers. So that's why you can see Loki is actually outside of the main sandstone body, but there's an outlier of sandstone there, and there's a few other outliers kind of along the periphery. So these ones are overlaid by sand, and then the rest of these are the sandstone has been eroded, the glaciers have completely removed it, and it's just basement rock. And another aspect to really highlight is that this project consists of numerous trends, and so it's a very ambitious project. So most exploration plays, you're testing a trend. They've got a little package of claims. They're testing maybe one or two within that, and certainly usually focusing on one. And one of the more ambitious and kind of crazy aspects, really, of the Aberdeen project is we have numerous trends, and so these are just the large ones. So you've got the main Thelon trend here, that's where Bjorn is on. You've got the Tadagak trend here. This is where the Judge Sissons fault is. That's a big trend. Lobster's on there as well. Big fault zone, big area of gravity lows. And you have the Kavik trend, the Loki trend. You've got the Tarzan trend. You've got Apollo, so on, Starbuck, a whole bunch of them, probably 15 in total. And so all of these trends have the potential to host deposits. So the Judge Sissons has already shown it does, Tadagak, as well as Arano's N deposit is also on that trend. And Kavik, which is actually kind of on a northeasterly, as well as there's lots of smaller scale trends in between these larger ones. So the whole area has been shattered by faults. The whole area has drill holes historically and ones that we have drilled that showed the right alteration. And so it's really just a matter of time and exploration to really showcase what this property actually has on it. So again, the unconformity type deposits, this is just a refresher in case, some of this can kind of go over people's heads. Sometimes it's better just to see it visually, but there's two main types. You got your basement type, contact type. So the contact type still has the sandstone cover. The deposits form at that contact between those older basement rocks, fault zones, which are key to the whole story, and the sandstone. And so these are some of the largest deposits in the world. So in the Athabasca Basin, the Carther River, Cigar Lake, the Phoenix deposit that Denison has, and numerous others that have been mined or found in the past are of that caliber. And it's a really wonderful place to precipitate or drop uranium at a solution. You got a porous sandstone and you got a hard, competent basement, and you got faults. And then you get this clay alteration that surrounds it. So one of the key things about the sandstone or contact type is that this kind of blowout of clay is usually quite extensive, and so it actually makes looking for these contact type ones in the sandstone a bit easier, because even though you might not hit obviously mineralization in the drill hole you're looking for, you'll hit this clay in the sand, or you'll hit the bleaching and all these kind of words that we always love to talk about. And that means that you're kind of in the area, and it's a much larger. So these types of clay alteration envelopes can be hundreds of meters outside of the actual ore body. And all ore bodies are different, but just as an overall kind of, rule of thumb. And then the uranium content in the sandstone varies as well. And so in the Thelon, the average uranium content just in dead boring sandstone is about 1 ppm uranium. And so anything over that is interesting. So when we look at our geochemistry and we see 2 ppm, that's interesting. If we see 10 ppm, well, that's really interesting. Now you're getting much more proximal to something going on. And if it's beyond that, then you're really possibly honing into a deposit or system. The basement's is trickier. So the sandstone's gone. It's just the basement rock, but you still have the faults, you still have the basement rock, and then you get these deposits that form. And so, but one of the things to key in there is that the alteration envelope typically is a lot narrower. And so not only do you not know kind of where to test, so at least when you have the sandstone, if you're testing that, once you've figured out how deep this is, whether this is 100 meters or 500 meters, you then have basically a Z, so a depth that you can target, and then you can kind of base that off of. So at least you know the depth of interest if you're looking for these. But these ones are a wild card, and so there's kind of a double-edged sword or problem with those types of deposits for finding, is because you don't know how deep they are. You don't know, they could be 50 meters down, they could be 800 meters down. So you don't have that Z because you don't have the sandstone to guide you. And then on top of that, the clay alteration envelopes tend to be a lot narrower. So you could be a lot closer. You could be 50 meters, 3 meters. Significantly close to these deposits and actually not hit them. And sometimes not even know that they're there because the alteration envelope is so small. So I just wanted to kind of showcase that, and that is a part of our project. So we're looking for both. And then deposits like Tadagak, have that challenge essentially where you don't know how deep they go, and the alteration can be quite tricky in drilling them. So you need a lot of drilling to figure it out, and a lot of persistence and perseverance once you know an area is fertile, to just keep testing and have the fortitude to not give up, because you can be very close and not know it. And so the targeting criteria, of course, like I said, gravity, and the reason why the gravity here is the gravity low, so that indicates the clay. We also look for magnetic lows. So this is a magnetic image here. So again, a high mag, low mag, the blues and the green lows. And so those are kind of the right basement rocks. So these types of deposits tend to form in, politic gneisses, mafic gneisses, not granites. Granites are mag highs, but sometimes they'll form at the contact. So it is important to have these granites. But this is the kind of, you're looking in the lows. So you look at that has the right basement geology. And you look for long-lived faults because those are the conduits. And so in our case, we don't have conductors, and I'll talk a little bit about this later on, like the Athabasca. So we have to rely on kind of looking at these breaks in the mag and using some other geophysical methods to help us find these faults, but you need to find those faults. There's no mineralization of this type without faults. And then you need to find areas where it can be focused and trapped. And we use favorable geochemistry, and we do all this desktop work to look at, uranium's one thing, but if you have elevated uranium, usually you found it already. So for the most part, it's pretty subtle before you've actually, discovered anything. And then we have other pathfinders. Boron is a big one in the thelon, some of these other metals like nickel or arsenic, cobalt, moly, kind of indicative of the reducing lithologies and alteration. So now get back to Loki. And so Loki is located where all these kind of things come together. And so it's a really strong gravity low. So this is a magnetic image. So we got the magnetic, got the granite. It's in a mag low, so you want that. It's in a huge gravity low. You've got numerous faults cutting through it. So you got this big northwestern and a bunch of subsidiary ones that aren't really shown here. And then east-northeast ones, northeast ones. So you got lots of faults, intersecting faults, exactly what you want to see. And you got the ability for fluid focusing and trapping because you've got this big competent body here. So fluids will basically potentially pool in this area rather than, of course, be dispersed because you've got this kind of fluid channeling granite body. And then from previous holes, we had, favorable alteration. So this picture here shows sandstone. So this, and I'll talk about this more too, but you get this bleaching, so this whitening of the sand. You see all this orange stuff, that's called limonite. That's important too. And then this gray stuff is what we call the sooty sulfide. And so why that's important is that's indicative of the reductant that will actually precipitate the uranium. And so if you have that moving around there, maybe we have an area where we have a lot of it. And if we have a lot of it, that might be an area that's precipitated or made a significant uranium deposit. And so that's what we look for. We look for it in historical holes. We look at it in the holes that we're currently drilling. And another exciting thing about the thelon, of course, is it has shallow sandstone here. So we're not drilling deep. These holes can be done in a couple days if everything goes well. And so you can test a lot of targets. And of course, if we do find anything, having a deposit under 200 meters down is very attractive. And so here's the Loki grid again. So the whole anomalies, this is just the gravity and some of the faults and the holes that we've done to date. And this is what was outlined in the press release that we put out a few weeks ago. So the whole gravity anomaly is about almost 5 kilometers long. So it's an enormous area, just wanting to kind of highlight that. And then I've kind of put in here, this is where the sandstone also is. So you've got this outlier of sandstone also within this gravity anomaly. And why that's also key is that if you've got this sandstone being preserved, that means that there's a major fault. There's major faults in the area. So it just backs up the well, it's mostly a fact, but the hypothesis that we have these major faults cutting through here because it's actually preserved it. So you've got some sort of mechanism that's kind of down dropped or shifted the rocks in this area, and the sandstone has been preserved. So that's extremely key. And then the gravity anomaly isn't just because there's sandstone there. We can see that the sandstone is altered. So the gravity anomaly is associated with the alteration. And so early days, so in the Cameco days, and I think it was 2011, but we drilled 2 holes in the area because again, it lights up with the gravity anomaly, and it also has all these intersecting faults, and it's along this, perspective trend. And so we drilled 2 holes there, and we intersected sandstone. So that was a surprise. We didn't know sandstone was there. Like I said, this is an outlier. The main sandstone body is to the north. But there was sandstone there, so that was interesting. And then the sandstone wasn't fresh. So, we would have walked away if it was. Or I wouldn't have thought about it again. We didn't actually get back to it, but it's always been in my mind since then, because it wasn't fresh. And so here's the sandstone down here. So Loki 2, you've got bleaching. So it's patchy. It's not, it's not super exciting, but it's not stick rock. It's not dead. You still have quite a bit of hematite. So that's the maroon here. So you got that older maroon staining, but you have, patchy bleaching. So it's been overprinted. So something's going on. Fluids are moving through here. So I just kept in my back pocket and was like, gotta go back. Gotta go back sometime if I can. Because something's going on here that's interesting. And so the very last hole of 2024, just as we were packing up, we rushed to do one last hole. I wasn't very popular for suggesting it, but we did it. And this is the same photo I showed on the other slide. But in this hole, only 50 meters away, essentially, from Loki 2, significantly more alteration. And so much more of this bleaching, so much less of this hematite. This is just a zoom in, of course. And then this is where we started seeing on fracture surfaces this gray. And so we also had the reductant. And so then super interesting, because it's like, okay, it's not just, an early kind of bleaching event that's whatever. No, this has the reductant moving through the area. And if that reductant is moving through the area, then there's potentially more of it, and there's potentially the ability to precipitate a big deposit. So that's why we are really excited. We were really excited last year. And then some of the geochemistry again, well over 10 ppm uranium in the sandstone again. So once we got the geochemistry back. And so that again shows that not only does it have the right alteration, but there's an enrichment of uranium in the area. So again, pointing to uranium fluids moving through the area. And if there's uranium fluids moving through the area, there could be a significant deposit in the area. So, and this is from my thesis, and I'm not going to go into this in big detail, but alteration, why it matters. And we talk a lot about it in these press releases, and I know people are just like, like show me the mineralization, or kind of leave me alone. But the alteration matters because that's how we find these things. And if we could just hit mineralization all the time, yeah, that would be great. But most of it is extremely subtle, and that's some of the biggest lessons I learned from Cameco and working there for several years, is that systematic, really good exploration where you are looking at very little, but it's the little clues, the little bit of clay that you see on a fracture, the little bit of clay you see in the rock, the little bit of sulfide, the little bit of quartz damaged, or uranium damaged quartz, all that stuff, as subtle as it can be and as boring and mundane as it can be, sometimes that subtle is very close to major deposits. And with Cameco also had the opportunity to look at some of these major deposits, and MacArthur will always stick in my mind as how ridiculously subtle the alteration was. Like you would never know that you had the world's largest uranium deposit within meters of core that you'd be looking at because it was so subtle. And so that's why alteration matters. Uh, we have to use every clue we can get, doing these drill holes, finding, it's not testing a very large area, and that's why we do it. And so this slide really is just kind of showing that sequence of alteration. And so the very, very, very background alteration, you get mostly fresh rock with this background maroon zone is what I call hematite. That's the very background. That tells you you're far away from anything interesting. There might not be anything interesting anywhere near it, except that this maroon zone is indicative, especially in the Thelon, of being close to fault zones, some of those major fault zones. So at the very least, it's telling you that this area has one of these major fault zones ripping through it, and so that's a good thing. The next stage is the bleaching, so this kind of whitey pink area. So this is, once you start getting into this, you're, a couple hundred to 50 meters away from potentially a deposit. And so you get this white zone, it's overprinted, the maroon zones, you can see how it's kind of faded out. And so when you start seeing that, you're starting to get closer to something, potentially. And so this cross-section here is Tadagak, just for reference. You got these steep mineralized lenses here, and then you got these different alteration envelopes. And so you got the mineralization itself, so once you're there, you found it. You got the gray zone next, which is a lot more tighter, which is that sooty sulfide. You get the white zone outboard of that, and then you get that maroon zone outside of that. And so the white zone is indicative of being closer, but it still can be very far away from potential deposit. The gray zone, however, typically once you start getting into significant sulfidic alteration, then you're within meters to 50 meters away, typically. And so that's very exciting. And that's why even when we see it on fractures and stuff like that, it seems very subtle. We're very excited about that. And of course, once you start seeing all this sort of stuff, where you actually, obviously, uranium mineralization and the bright red and all that sort of stuff, well, you're in it. You've found it. So this is Loki. And so this is hole 6 that we drilled this year. So it's the third hole of the 2025 drilling. And this is essentially the whole sandstone column is this. It's completely white. All that red is gone. It's full of the orange, which is what we call the limonite. And then it also has sulfide in it. And so this is the sand full, broken up, some of it completely wiped out, pure clay, other parts a little bit more competent, but full of clay. And so we have faults in the sandstone, it's completely bleached, limonite, everything you want to see. Like this is the type of alteration you see above the big deposits in the Athabasca. And this is the first time this type of alteration, this is certainly related to uranium mineralization event in the sandstone. And so, this hasn't really been demonstrated before. And that's why this is game changing. Even this of in itself is a huge success and a big step forward for the Thelon Basin, because up until this point, it wasn't known if mineralization or the processes actually went up into the sandstone. And now that we can show that it has, we think it's only a matter of time till that we can actually find mineralization at the unconformity. And so again, another photo. So this is the next 9 meters of core. Again, completely bleached, full of limonite, totally pulverized, full of faults, and then fairly significant gray or that sooty sulfide coatings on fractures. So it's exactly what we want to see. It's showing all the right characteristics, and it's just drilling more to to see what we can find here. There's definitely something going on. And I'm really excited to get the geochem here because, I tried to get you excited last year about Loki 3. And, like it's got 10 ppm uranium. Well, I think it got way more than 10 ppm here, but we'll see. The assays will let us know, but certainly something is going on here. And just for context, so this is another grid. Uh, it's called Ghost Grid. This was drilled back in the Cameco days, and this is what the sandstone looks like when it's not very interesting. And this isn't even entirely uninteresting because there is some of that bleaching and stuff like that going on, but there's not a lot of it. And by and large, this hole is mostly red, the red bed, if you've heard that term before. And so that's what it looks like when it's not interesting. You see it's very competent. You don't see any. You see there's a little bit of gouge there. So I have very few, and that's one of the things that's attracted me to the Thelon Basin in general, is that in all my time drilling up here, I've drilled very few duds, and it's not because, we're amazing and we don't drill duds. I just don't think there is a lot of duds because the area is so fertile and there's a lot going on. So even though this is a kind of a dud, it's not a dud. There's still bleaching, there's still clay, and there's still interesting stuff. But as you can see, it looks way different than, the holes that we drilled this summer at, Loki 6, and I'll show some of the other ones. You see lots of red and stuff like that. So let's go back just for this. Oh, it's not going to let me go back. Okay. Well, I'll show it. I'll show it in. You'll see it in the other pictures, but it's obviously way more competent. It doesn't have all the limonite, and it certainly doesn't have the sooty sulfide and all that sort of stuff. So again, just to show where that is, Ghost Grid is way off this. But so I was showing you hole 6. So that's this one here. That has the great alteration that there's so much testing to do. And then we step back into the deeper part of the anomaly to see what we can see. Again, testing all this sort of stuff to figure this out. And I'll show why it's a little harder to test in our area of the woods than it is potentially for other areas. So this is the hole 7. So this is the hole that actually has the hole that has mineralization. So you can see it's quite a bit different. So very broken up, still a lot of red, still kicking around. So it has some bleaching, but it's not completely wiped out like hole 6. But it's still broken up, so you still have all these sandstone faults. You got quite a bit of limonite, so you got all this orange sort of stuff like that. And then actually, this holes have been silicified, or we call it silicified, when it basically gets kind of impregnated with quartz, like quartz-rich fluids, and it makes it hard. Which is actually very encouraging, because some uranium deposits have what they call that silica cap. And so it kind of is reminiscent of that. So we also have that sort of stuff going on. Again, this is a complete first for the Thelon Basin, and very exciting because we're kind of evolving a model here. We were using the Athabasca model to find these deposits, but we don't know the exact model. And I've talked about this on some of the other projects. Like models are very extremely incomplete puzzles that we think we understand, but we don't. But we try to make inferences as best we can based on what we've seen before. But every area is different, and geology is a very complex sort of multivariable science. So it can be really tricky. And so, anyways, the fact that there could potentially a silica cap here, again, is another big first for the Thelon, and exciting. And then here's the mineralization. So not tons of bleaching. We get to the unconformity, which is here, and then we get this kind of weakly bleached zone right at the unconformity, and this is where we got that up to that 500 and some CPS on the probe. And so you can see you got the bleaching, you got the limonite. I'm just going to zoom in here. So again, yeah, bleaching, limonite, brecciation, which is just that, broken up stuff, and sooty, a lot of sooty sulfide on these kind of bedding parallel and cross-cutting fractures. And that's where the lion's share of the counts are. So mineralization, the first instance of uranium mineralization at the unconformity in the Northeast Thelon Basin. And so we're excited to see what these assays do show. And of course, no, we don't have a big deposit here by any means, but this is the start. This is where it starts. And so we know it can happen. We know that it can happen at the unconformity. And so it's just now kind of honing in and figuring out the structures, which I'll talk about again, and why that's not just a slam dunk and why that takes time. So here's that gravity anomaly again. So nice and bright this time, blue, gravity low, clay, we know it's clay. And so the drill holes, of course. So, and this is up to the drilling I talked about in the press release. And we've done a few more holes since then. And we'll be able to talk about them too as the weeks and month progress. And so I just drew a line here. So in the Athabasca, you have EM conductors, and so which makes their lives a lot easier to explore because you know where the EM conductors are, the fault zone, and they're also that area of trapping, that reductant where you get the mineralization coming out. So in our area, we don't have conductors. So there's no graphite. We have the faults. All those EM conductors are faults, but we don't have the graphite, so we can't image it nicely with the EM. So we use the mag and we use resistivity and the gravity, and then just looking at the rocks to help us figure out where the faults are. So we have to do it kind of in a harder way. So, we're looking, we put all these faults in. They're not just nice, discrete, simpler anyway, faults. And so you got kind of different types of kind of fault zones. And in the Athabasca, you kind of have that single conductor, and you're chasing that. You're drilling that, with the sandstone or without the sandstone and figuring it out. One of the differences with Thelon is that our fault zones are much more complicated and just complex zones, and it's a term, and it's because you just don't have the one fault and the kind of damaged rock around it or whatever. You have multiple faults within, so you kind of have more of a fault corridor, and so that's what we're dealing with, numerous ones, and it's to figure out, okay, which one is it? Which one is hosting the mineralization? We know that the area is fertile. We know that there's clay. We know that there's faults. It's like, which is it? The northwest faults. A lot of the mineralization to date's been along east-northeast, but there's also there's an interesting northeast one cutting through here. So again, it's figuring out where to target along these faults that aren't just lines, they're corridors. So it's how do we test that? So it takes a bit of time with the geological team, a lot of work and thinking on that. It's also a huge area. So like I said, the whole anomaly is about 5 kilometers long. This is alone, about 3.7 kilometers long. And so also just want to show that these types of uranium deposits are small, or at least they're big if you find the right one as far as tonnage and grade, but their footprints are very small. And so just for context, in this big Loki anomaly, I wanted to kind of show you McArthur River. And so this is the largest and highest grade uranium deposit in the world that is mined in Saskatchewan. And so it consists of numerous kind of zones. You've heard the term pearls on a string. And so this is it just kind of blown up to scale within the Loki anomaly. And so some of the McArthur River, just in kind of width, is less than 50 meters thick. So I think in some parts, up to, 15, 20 meters thick. So, if you're doing 50-meter spaced holes, or you're doing um, high, like wider spaced holes, 100 space holes, 100-meter space holes, it's so easy to miss them. And so that's kind of what I want to show, is that, there's the highest grade deposit in the world, and how easy you can step between it. You can not target it at the right depth, and you can step over it, you can step under it. So it's just it's the nature of our exploration, but it's worth mentioning, and that in order to test this out fully, we'll need, you know, dozens of holes to test this to the level that it needs. And of course, we could not do that this summer to that scale, but we're hoping down the road we can. And again, where is the deposit? So that's northeast, if it's coming through there, is there a deposit, and which direction is it? And just showing you how small it is, and how you can get, little sniffs and be close. You can get little sniffs and be far. So that's the nature of the beast here. But it's also, it just shows you the potential as well. And there's so much to find. And this is, like I said, we're a project of trends. We don't have a trend. We have multiple trends, and some of those trends are already mineralized, and some have already shown extensive favorable alteration. And so it's just picking the right ones. It's getting a critical mass of drilling. And so in the last, with Forum, and then this year, we were able to explore, which was amazing. But again, in order to explore a property of this scale and potential, requires a lot more. And the prize is big, because this is a tier 1 project. This project has the potential to host, another, you know, high grade, high tonnage deposit. It's just a matter of time. We have everything, we have all the building blocks and everything that points to it, and this year shows it even more, because with the actual, not only mineralization at the unconformity, but the level of alteration in the sandstone is like and extremely comparable to the highest grade deposits in the Athabasca Basin. And so, yes, lots of forward-looking statements here, just to cover that. I obviously feel very strongly about this project, but I think it's for extremely good reason. Like I said, this is where you want to be, and it's going to take some time, and it's definitely perseverance and effort are required, but the prize will be worth it for sure. And Geiger, as a part of the OR group, soon to be trading in a few weeks as Beep, and that's just super exciting. Super excited to work with this group, and basically have the platform to carry this project forward. So thank you very much, and I'll be doing lots of these, and I hope this is helpful, and we'll go from there.